Sweat dripped from Alex Reed's forehead as another training session ended in spectacular failure, the human cadet lying flat on the padded floor, while his alien classmates helped him up with expressions that mixed concern with barely concealed pity. The Galactic Military Academy on Station Omega-7 had welcomed its first human exchange students 6 months ago, and the results were proving disappointing to most observers. Though Alex refused to give up despite consistently ranking in the bottom percentile of every combat assessment, Commander Thex paced around the training arena, his scaled feet clicking against the metal flooring as he observed the aftermath of another disastrous sparring session where Alex had been systematically outmaneuvered by cadets from a dozen different species. The human shows determination. Captain Nira buzzed from her observation perch, her compound eyes tracking Alex's movements as he limped toward the equipment racks. But determination without capability leads only to injury and failure in real combat scenarios. Major Korvac's crystalline form shimmered with agreement as he processed combat data through his internal matrices, calculating probability curves that showed human performance falling well below acceptable parameters for elite military units. Colonel Jara materialized beside her colleagues, her energy-based form flickering with concern, as she reviewed Alex's medical report showing an alarming frequency of training injuries that would have hospitalized most species, but barely slowed the stubborn human down. The 4 instructors had been debating Alex's future for weeks, torn between admiration for the human's relentless spirit and cold military reality that suggested humans might be better suited for support roles rather than frontline combat positions. Standard assessments are clearly inadequate for evaluating human potential, Commander Thex observed, his reptilian brain processing the problem with typical Saurian methodical precision. Perhaps we need to design specialized testing protocols that account for their unique physiological characteristics. Captain Nira's antennae twitched with interest as she considered the implications, her hive mind species having encountered similar challenges when first integrating with galactic military structures centuries ago. The humans' reflexes are adequate by their species standards, Major Korvac contributed, his voice resonating through harmonic frequencies that translated as cautious analysis. But their sensory apparatus lacks the enhancements that most species take for granted in combat situations. Colonel Jara pulsed with sudden inspiration, her energy form brightening as a potential solution crystallized in her consciousness, realizing that perhaps the problem lay not with human capabilities, but with their testing methods. Alex, meanwhile, had finished storing equipment and was reviewing his performance metrics on a portable display, muttering calculations under his breath as he tried to understand why his reaction times consistently fell short of academy standards. The other cadets had already departed for evening meals, leaving Alex alone in the training facility where he often stayed late attempting to improve his scores through sheer repetition and willpower unknown to Alex. His dedication had not gone unnoticed by the instructional staff, who monitored all training facilities through sophisticated surveillance systems designed to ensure cadet safety and measure progress. Commander Thex called for a private meeting with his fellow instructors that evening, suggesting they needed to develop a comprehensive evaluation that would either prove humans belonged in elite combat units or demonstrate conclusively that they were unsuited for such roles. Traditional tests measure reaction speed, spatial awareness, and tactical thinking using parameters optimized for species with natural advantages we do not possess, Captain Nira pointed out, her analytical mind already working through the complexities of designing fair assessments for radically different physiologies. Major Korvac accessed historical databases containing information about human military conflicts, noting patterns of behavior that seemed almost contradictory to conventional tactical wisdom yet somehow proved effective. In their native environment, Colonel Jara suggested they design something unprecedented in Academy history. A completely customized assessment that would push human capabilities to their absolute limits while accounting for their unique evolutionary background. Discussion continued deep into the station's night cycle as the 4 instructors debated various scenarios, eventually settling on a multi-phase evaluation that would test not just reflexes, but adaptability, creativity, and psychological resilience under extreme pressure. They decided to use the Academy's most advanced training facility, a zero-gravity chamber equipped with holographic projectors, movable obstacles, and sophisticated targeting systems that could create virtually any combat scenario imaginable. The test would involve magnetically guided training blades that could be programmed with various flight patterns, speeds, and behaviors while requiring the test subject to complete tactical objectives under increasingly difficult conditions. Cadet in Academy history had ever advanced beyond level 3 of the 7-tier difficulty progression, with most species-specific advantages becoming irrelevant as chaos and complexity overwhelmed even the most sophisticated sensory enhancements. Commander Thex felt confident that this assessment would provide definitive answers about human combat potential, either revealing hidden capabilities or confirming that humans required alternative career paths within galactic military structures. Captain Nira began programming the assessment parameters, her compound eyes tracking multiple data streams simultaneously as she calibrated systems for optimal challenge without crossing into lethal territory. Major Korvac computed probability matrices for each difficulty level, ensuring that the test remained theoretically possible while pushing test subjects far beyond their comfort zones and familiar tactical approaches. Colonel Jara coordinated with station medical staff to ensure emergency response capabilities, knowing that this assessment would likely result in injuries regardless of which species attempted. Alex received notification of his special assessment through official channels the following morning, along with instructions to report to Training Chamber 7 at 0800 station time for evaluation procedures. The message provided no details about the nature of the test, merely stating that this assessment would determine his continued eligibility for combat track placement within the Academy's advanced programs. Alex spent that morning reviewing standard combat manuals and practicing basic exercises, unaware that his instructors had designed something completely outside normal Academy protocols. 0800 approached. Alex made his way through the station corridors toward Training Chamber 7, passing other cadets who watched him with expressions mixing curiosity and sympathy, most assuming they were witnessing his final attempt before transfer to non-combat specializations. The chamber doors slid open to reveal the 4 instructors waiting with serious expressions, their various forms of body language conveying the gravity of the situation, even across species barriers that normally made such communication difficult. Cadet Reed, Commander Thex announced formally, "You will now undergo specialized assessment designed to evaluate human combat potential under conditions that standard testing cannot adequately measure." Alex stood at attention, his heart rate increasing as he absorbed the implications of facing all 4 senior instructors simultaneously for what was clearly intended as his make-or-break moment at the Academy. Alex stared at the assessment parameters displayed on his personal tablet, his mind racing as he absorbed the seemingly impossible requirements that his instructors expected him to complete within the next 48 hours. The test specifications read like something from a fever dream. Dodge magnetically guided training blades in zero gravity, while completing tactical objectives across 7 escalating difficulty levels that no cadet had ever survived past level 3 hours of reviewing. Academy records revealed the brutal truth. Every species that attempted this assessment relied on their natural evolutionary advantages, whether enhanced reflexes, armored carapaces, energy shields, or sensory capabilities that far exceeded baseline human parameters. Sitting alone in his quarters, Alex realized with growing clarity that his instructors fundamentally misunderstood what made humans effective in combat situations, having designed a test that played to every other species' strengths while ignoring human evolutionary heritage. The other species approached combat with overwhelming physical advantages or sophisticated biological enhancements, but humans had survived through persistence hunting, tool use, and most importantly, the ability to find patterns and solutions where none seemed to exist. Alex pulled up archived footage of previous assessment attempts, watching as various cadets failed in predictable ways. Saurians tried to tank through blade storms using their natural armor. Chitauri relied on compound eyes to track multiple threats simultaneously. Axiom created energy barriers, and Ethereal simply phased through attacks. Every approach followed logical tactical doctrine based on each species' natural capabilities, and every approach failed catastrophically when overwhelmed by the sheer chaos of higher difficulty levels. Alex leaned back in his chair and smiled for the first time in weeks, finally understanding that his instructors had accidentally created the perfect test for human capabilities without realizing it. He began accessing his personal memory files, pulling up childhood experiences that suddenly seemed incredibly relevant. Specifically, those endless hours playing dodgeball in school gymnasiums, where survival meant not being the strongest or fastest, but the most unpredictable. Dodgeball had taught him lessons that no military academy could replicate: how to read multiple trajectories simultaneously, how to use momentum and timing instead of raw speed, how to turn defensive positioning into offensive opportunities, and most importantly, how to treat overwhelming odds as a game rather than a death sentence. Alex spent the next day studying not tactical manuals, but sports footage, analyzing dodgeball champions who survived impossible odds through sheer unpredictability and spatial awareness rather than superior physical capabilities. The magnetic guidance systems controlling the training blades operated on predictable algorithms, designed to challenge conventional dodging patterns, but Alex realized they could be exploited using techniques that no alien species would ever consider. He requisitioned time in an auxiliary training chamber and began practicing movement patterns that seemed random, but followed internal logic based on childhood games, treating the space not as a battlefield, but as a playground with deadly consequences. Other cadets occasionally stopped to watch Alex's bizarre training regimen, unable to understand why he was practicing dance-like movements and seemingly random directional changes that bore no resemblance to any recognized combat style. Alex ignored their confusion and continued developing what he privately called chaos surfing, the ability to find flow states within overwhelming complexity by embracing randomness rather than fighting against it. His movement patterns incorporated elements from every Earth sport he could remember: baseball slides, basketball pivots, football jukes, soccer cuts, and even breakdancing moves that allowed rapid directional changes without losing momentum. The key insight came when Alex realized that alien combat doctrine emphasized eliminating chaos through superior capabilities, while human doctrine had always focused on thriving within chaos through adaptability and pattern recognition. He began treating the upcoming assessment not as a combat test, but as the ultimate game of dodgeball played with stakes high enough to matter, requiring him to channel every playground instinct he had ever developed. Training sessions became increasingly surreal as Alex practiced catching imaginary objects and redirecting them at targets, his muscle memory recalling countless games where success meant turning opponents' attacks into your own weapons. The breakthrough moment arrived when Alex stopped trying to avoid being hit and started focusing on controlling when and where impacts occurred, realizing that dodgeball champions never actually avoided all incoming projectiles, but rather chose which ones to take and how to minimize their effects. He spent hours perfecting techniques for redirecting momentum, using glancing blows to alter trajectory while maintaining forward motion, and most importantly, learning to laugh at situations that should terrify him. Alex's research revealed that human psychological responses to extreme stress often involved inappropriate emotional reactions: laughter during danger, playfulness in life-threatening situations, and treating serious challenges as elaborate games. These responses confused other species who interpreted them as mental instability, but Alex recognized them as adaptive mechanisms that allowed humans to function effectively when conventional, rational thought became impossible. The night before his assessment, Alex recorded a message to his family back on Earth, explaining that he was about to attempt something that would either prove humans belonged among galactic elite forces or get him expelled from the academy. He spent his final hours in meditation-like preparation, not the formal meditation practiced by energy-based species, but the focused relaxation that athletes used before major competitions. Alex visualized the test chamber as a massive playground filled with opportunities rather than threats, programming his subconscious to treat magnetic blades as oversized rubber balls that could be caught, redirected, or simply avoided through clever positioning. His pre-assessment meal consisted of comfort foods from Earth, pizza and chocolate, chosen specifically because they reminded him of childhood rather than military rations designed for optimal physical performance. As sleep time approached, Alex felt a strange calmness settling over him, the same feeling he remembered from school tournaments where the pressure was high, but the fundamentals remained the same as playground games. He dreamed that night of gymnasium floors and flying rubber balls, of diving catches and impossible saves, Of games where being the last one standing required not superior strength, but superior stubbornness and willingness to take risks. The morning alarm found Alex already awake, stretching and preparing his body using warm-up routines designed for athletic competition rather than military exercises. His mind focused not on tactical scenarios but on the pure joy of movement and challenge. He dressed in standard academy training gear, but added personal touches that reminded him of home. Compression sleeves that resembled those worn by basketball players, and shoes with grip patterns optimized for rapid directional changes. Walking toward Training Chamber 7, Alex no longer felt the crushing pressure of military evaluation, but the familiar excitement of stepping onto a playing field where anything could happen, and the only rules that mattered were the ones that kept the game interesting. Other cadets watched him pass with expressions of confusion and concern, unable to understand why someone facing potential expulsion appeared relaxed and almost eager, rather than terrified. Alex entered the chamber where his 4 instructors waited, their alien features conveying various degrees of professional interest and barely concealed skepticism about his chances of success. "Are you prepared for assessment, Cadet Reed?" Commander Thex inquired formally, his scaled features showing no emotion as he prepared to witness what he expected would be a brief and decisive demonstration of human limitations. Training Chamber 7 transformed around Alex as holographic displays materialized and gravity generators cycled down to 0, leaving him floating in the center of a space that suddenly felt infinite and full of deadly possibilities. The 4 instructors retreated to their observation booth, their various forms of sensory apparatus focused intently on monitoring systems that would record every microsecond of what they expected to be a very brief assessment. Level 1 initiating, Captain Nira announced through the chamber's communication system, her compound eyes tracking multiple data streams as the first wave of training blades emerged from hidden panels. 3. Magnetically guided projectiles began lazy orbital patterns around the chamber's perimeter, while holographic targets appeared at strategic locations, requiring Alex to navigate through the blade paths while completing tactical objectives. Most cadets approached Level 1 with textbook defensive positioning, using superior reflexes or natural armor to minimize contact while methodically engaging targets. But Alex immediately did something that made all 4 instructors pause in confusion. He launched himself directly toward the nearest blade instead of away from it, using the chamber wall to redirect his momentum in a spinning motion that carried him past the projectile while maintaining forward velocity toward his first objective. "Fascinating," Major Korvac observed, his crystalline form shimmering with analytical interest as he recorded movement patterns that bore no resemblance to any recognized combat doctrine. The human appears to be treating the projectiles as navigational aids rather than obstacles. Alex reached his first target and tagged it with his training weapon. But instead of seeking defensive positioning for the next objective, he pushed off the target platform and used its momentum to intercept a training blade that was curving back toward his position. The instructors watched in stunned silence as Alex caught the magnetic blade mid-flight and immediately redirected it toward a secondary target. Treating the deadly projectile like a tool rather than a threat, did he just... Colonel Jara began, her energy form flickering with disbelief as she processed what her sensors had recorded. "He caught it," Commander Thex confirmed, his reptilian brain struggling to categorize behavior that seemed to violate every principle of survival instinct that evolution had programmed into thinking beings. Alex was laughing now, a sound that echoed strangely through the zero-gravity chamber, as he completed Level 1's objectives in half the expected time, while treating the magnetic blades like partners in an elaborate dance level. 2 activated automatically, introducing 6 blades with more aggressive flight patterns and additional environmental obstacles that required 3-dimensional thinking to navigate safely. Where other cadets had struggled with the increased complexity, Alex seemed to thrive on it, using the additional chaos to create even more opportunities for creative problem-solving. He began incorporating the obstacles into his movement patterns, treating floating debris and training equipment as stepping stones that allowed him to change direction in ways that no flight-capable species had ever considered. "His movement appears random," Captain Nira observed, her analytical mind trying to find patterns in what seemed like complete chaos. "Yet he consistently arrives at optimal positions for objective completion." Alex bounced off a floating panel, and twisted through a formation of 3 blades that were converging on his position, somehow threading the needle between them while simultaneously tagging another target with precision that suggested his apparent randomness was anything but Major Korvac's. Probability matrices were generating error messages as he tried to calculate the likelihood of Alex's continued success, the human's approach falling so far outside normal parameters that his analytical systems couldn't process it. Level 3 engaged with barely a pause, flooding the chamber with a dozen training blades and introducing gravitational fluctuations that had historically overwhelmed even the most capable cadets. Instead of becoming more cautious as difficulty increased, Alex seemed to become more playful, treating each new challenge as an interesting puzzle rather than a potentially lethal threat. He began using the gravitational shifts to enhance his mobility, timing his movements to catch gravitational waves that launched him across the chamber at velocities that would have been impossible under normal physics. "This is unprecedented," Commander Thex muttered, his professional calm cracking slightly as he watched Alex navigate a blade formation that should have been mathematically impossible to survive. Alex grabbed a training blade that had overshot its targeting algorithm and spun it around his body like a baton before releasing it toward a distant target, his face showing the same expression of concentrated joy that human children displayed during particularly engaging games. The 4 instructors found themselves leaning forward in their observation booth, professional skepticism giving way to fascination as they witnessed tactical approaches that challenged everything they thought they understood about combat dynamics. Level 4 initiated without warning, introducing energy barriers that blocked conventional movement paths and forcing test subjects to find alternative routes through increasingly complex, 3-dimensional mazes. Alex responded by treating the energy barriers like trampolines, using their repulsive force to ricochet between surfaces at angles that created completely new movement possibilities. "He's not dodging them," Colonel Jara realized with growing amazement. "He's playing with them." Training blades that were programmed to be unavoidable suddenly became components in Alex's elaborate choreography, their predictable flight paths serving as timing mechanisms that helped him coordinate increasingly complex maneuvers. The human began combining multiple techniques simultaneously, catching blades while navigating obstacles, redirecting projectiles toward targets while changing his own trajectory, and maintaining perfect spatial awareness despite the chamber's overwhelming sensory chaos. Captain Nira's compound eyes were tracking Alex's movements with increasing difficulty as his speed and unpredictability exceeded even her enhanced sensory capabilities, forcing her to rely on chamber sensors to maintain continuous observation. Alex completed Level 4's objectives while somehow managing to collect 3 additional training blades that he was juggling in a complex pattern that seemed to serve no tactical purpose except to demonstrate his complete comfort with the situation he's showing off. Major Korvac observed with what might have been admiration in his harmonic voice, recognizing competitive behavior that transcended species boundaries. Level 5 activated with a mechanical sound that seemed ominous even through the chamber's advanced audio systems, introducing variables that had never been successfully navigated by any cadet in Academy History 24. Training blades filled the space with flight patterns that created overlapping fields of destruction while environmental hazards shifted every few seconds, creating a constantly changing puzzle that defied conventional solutions. Alex's response was to burst into delighted laughter that somehow managed to sound completely sane, despite the circumstances, his human brain apparently interpreting the escalating danger as evidence that the game was getting more interesting. He began moving with fluid grace that seemed to violate physics, finding paths through the blade storm that existed only in the brief moments between pattern shifts, his timing based on intuitive understanding rather than calculated analysis. The instructors watched in silence as Alex not only survived Level 5, but began collecting training blades like trophies, eventually accumulating a small arsenal that he wielded with the casual confidence of someone playing an elaborate version of catch. "Impossible," Commander Thex whispered, his scaled features showing emotions that had no equivalent in human expression, watching as Alex completed objectives that were designed to be theoretically achievable, but practically impossible. Alex finished Level 5 by creating a cascade of redirected training blades that hit every remaining target simultaneously, a maneuver so complex that the instructor's recording system struggled to track all the individual projectile paths. As the chamber prepared for level 6, Alex floated in the center of the space with training blades orbiting around him like a mechanical solar system, his expression showing anticipation rather than exhaustion or fear. "Should we stop the test?" Colonel Jara asked uncertainly, her energy form flickering with concern as she realized they were witnessing something unprecedented in galactic military history. "No," Commander Thex replied firmly, his professional curiosity overriding safety concerns as he prepared to witness what happened when human adaptability met truly impossible odds. Level 6 erupted into existence with a complexity that seemed designed by sadistic minds, flooding the chamber with 36 training blades that moved in interlocking spiral patterns, while environmental hazards shifted every 3 seconds. Plasma barriers crackling with energy created temporary walls that forced rapid route changes, while gravitational fields randomly inverted or amplified, turning the chamber into a 3-dimensional maze that redefined itself faster than most minds could process. Alex responded to the chaos by doing something that violated every principle of tactical thinking the instructors had ever encountered. He stopped trying to predict the system's behavior and instead began reading its rhythm like music. The humans' movements became flowing and improvisational, finding harmony within the mechanical chaos as he surfed gravitational waves and used plasma barriers like dance partners that helped him change direction at impossible angles. "He's treating the entire chamber as a single system," Major Korvac observed with growing amazement, his analytical matrices finally finding patterns in Alex's approach that resembled nothing so much as artistic expression training. Blades that should have been unavoidable became components in Alex's increasingly elaborate choreography, their predictable physics serving as reliable constants that he could incorporate into movements that seemed to bend reality. Alex began using techniques that no military academy had ever taught because no instructor had ever imagined them: wall running in zero gravity using magnetic boot interactions, blade surfing by riding the magnetic fields of training projectiles, and environmental weapon creation using debris and obstacles. The 4 instructors found themselves debating whether to halt the assessment as Alex reached performance levels that challenged their understanding of what was physically possible within the chamber's safety parameters. His approach is completely unprecedented. Captain Nira buzzed with professional fascination, her compound eyes tracking movement patterns that seemed to incorporate elements from artistic performance, athletic competition, and pure creative problem-solving. Alex collected training blades until he had accumulated enough to begin juggling them, while simultaneously navigating the chamber's increasingly hostile environment, his face showing concentration mixed with pure joy. The humans started using collected blades as tools in ways their designers had never intended, creating temporary shields by spinning them in defensive formations, using their magnetic properties to redirect other projectiles, and even employing them as anchoring points for rapid directional changes. Level 6. Subjectives required accessing targets that moved through the plasma barrier maze, while avoiding gravitational anomalies that could crush organic matter. Yet Alex reached them by essentially parkour running through 3-dimensional space. He transformed the chamber's obstacles into advantages, using plasma barriers to accelerate his movements through electromagnetic interaction with his collected blades, turning defensive hazards into propulsion systems. "This is beyond tactical innovation," Commander Thex admitted grudgingly, watching Alex complete objectives while maintaining a collection of 16 training blades in various orbital patterns around his body. The human began employing what could only be described as weaponized creativity, using environmental elements in combinations that their designers had never considered possible. Alex treated gravitational anomalies like trampolines that could be triggered at precise moments, plasma barriers as electromagnetic railways for launching projectiles, and the chamber's own safety systems as additional tools for navigation. His spatial awareness seemed to operate on levels that challenged the instructor's understanding of human sensory capabilities, as Alex consistently anticipated changes in the environment before they became apparent to sophisticated monitoring systems. The most disturbing aspect for the alien instructors was Alex's emotional state throughout the escalating chaos. Instead of showing stress responses appropriate to life-threatening situations, he appeared to be having the time of his life. He's actually enjoying this, Colonel Jara observed with mixture of admiration and concern, her energy form fluctuating as she processed the implications of human psychological responses to extreme danger. Alex completed level 6 by creating what could only be described as a kinetic sculpture, using all of his collected training blades, plasma barriers, and gravitational fields, turning the chamber into a three-dimensional artwork that somehow managed to hit every target simultaneously. The chamber fell silent as level 6 concluded, leaving Alex floating in the center with blade fragments orbiting around him like a mechanical asteroid belt, his breathing steady and his expression eager rather than exhausted. Theoretical question. Major Korvac addressed his colleagues while maintaining sensor focus on Alex's vital signs. What happens if he actually completes level 7? Commander Thex considered the implications of that possibility, realizing that they might be witnessing the emergence of combat capabilities that would require complete revision of galactic military doctrine. Level 7 has never been completed, Captain Nira pointed out, her analytical mind struggling with the concept that their impossible assessment might actually be possible for this particular test subject, Colonel. Jara pulsed with uncertainty as she reviewed the assessment parameters they had programmed, suddenly wondering whether their supposedly impossible test was about to reveal that human limitations existed in completely different categories than they had assumed. Alex waited patiently in the chamber's center while his instructors debated, occasionally adjusting the orbital patterns of his collected training blades with casual gestures that demonstrated complete mastery over tools that were supposed to be threatening him. The human's approach to the assessment had evolved from treating it like a game to treating it like an art form, finding beauty and creative expression within scenarios designed to test survival instincts under extreme pressure. His collected arsenal of training blades had become extensions of his body language, moving in patterns that expressed emotions and intentions in ways that transcended verbal communication. He's turned our assessment into a performance, Commander Thex realized with professional respect mixed with mild irritation, recognizing that Alex had somehow transformed their scientific evaluation into creative expression. The instructors found themselves facing a decision that would define not only Alex's future but potentially reshape their understanding of human capabilities. Within galactic military structures, Alex maintained his patient, floating position while blade fragments continued their hypnotic orbital dance, his eyes showing anticipation for whatever challenge would come next, rather than any trace of the exhaustion that should have accompanied his unprecedented performance. The chamber's systems hummed with potential energy as they prepared for level 7, a scenario that existed more as theoretical exercise than practical assessment, designed to be mathematically unwinnable, even for species with supernatural advantages. Initiate level 7, Commander Thex announced after brief consultation with his colleagues, their professional curiosity overwhelming their concerns about safety protocols and academy precedents. Alex smiled with genuine excitement as the chamber began its final transformation, treating the announcement like news of a particularly interesting puzzle rather than notification of impending impossible odds. The 4 instructors settled back in their observation booth to witness what would either be the most spectacular failure in academy history or a fundamental redefinition of what they thought they knew about human potential in extreme combat situations. Environmental systems engaged with mechanical sounds that seemed ominous even to species that didn't rely on auditory threat assessment, preparing to create conditions that no organic being had ever successfully navigated. Alex adjusted his grip on his collected training blades and prepared to face the ultimate test of his unconventional approach, his entire body language communicating readiness for whatever chaos the chamber could generate. Level 7 activated with a sound like reality tearing itself apart, filling the chamber with 64 training blades that moved in, patterns so complex they seemed to violate the laws of physics while environmental hazards shifted every half-second. The space itself began collapsing inward from multiple directions simultaneously, creating gravitational shears that could crush most organic matter while plasma barriers formed and dissolved in sequences that defied prediction or logical navigation. Alex felt something shift in his consciousness as the overwhelming chaos engaged systems in his brain that existed far below rational thought, triggering responses that human ancestors had used to survive impossible odds through sheer adaptive stubbornness. His collected training blades suddenly became extensions of his nervous system rather than external tools, moving in harmony with his subconscious intentions as conscious thought gave way to pure instinctual flow. The four instructors watched in stunned silence as Alex's movements transformed from creative problem-solving into something that resembled a dance with chaos itself, his body finding paths through the mathematical impossibility that surrounded him. Time seemed to dilate as Alex entered what human athletes called the zone, that psychological state where conscious planning disappeared and every action emerged from perfect integration between mind, body, and environment. Training blades that should have been unavoidable became partners in an elaborate three-dimensional ballet, their magnetic fields creating currents that Alex surfed, while simultaneously using them to navigate through collapsing space. His brain activity is showing patterns we've never recorded before. Captain Nero reported with scientific fascination overriding her concern. Watching neural scans that indicated Alex was processing information in ways that challenged their understanding of organic cognition, Alex moved through the blade storm like water finding paths through stone, his collected arsenal creating defensive formations that dissolved and reformed in response to threats that changed faster than conscious thought could track. The chamber's collapsing geometry forced him to exist in 3 dimensions plus time, finding routes through spacetime that existed only in brief moments between environmental shifts. Environmental hazards that were designed to be lethal became components in Alex's navigation system as he used gravitational shears to accelerate between plasma barriers that served as electromagnetic railways for rapid transport across impossible distances. He's not surviving level 7. Major Korvac observed with growing amazement as his analytical systems struggled to model what they were recording. He's collaborating with it. Alex's laughter echoed through the chamber as he discovered that level 7's seemingly random chaos actually contained hidden patterns that only became apparent when approached. With complete trust rather than analytical fear, his movements began, incorporating elements that seemed to predict environmental changes before they occurred, suggesting that human intuition could process complexity patterns that escaped even sophisticated artificial intelligence systems. The training blades orbiting around Alex formed protective formations that shifted in response to threats his conscious mind hadn't even registered. His subconscious navigation systems, operating at speeds that challenged the chamber's sensor capabilities. Plasma barriers that should have been impassable became launching platforms that Alex used to ricochet across the chamber while maintaining perfect spatial orientation despite gravitational fields that randomly inverted. Every few seconds, look at his vital signs, Colonel Jara observed with mixture of concern and professional fascination. His stress hormones are actually decreasing as difficulty increases. Alex had entered a psychological state where extreme danger triggered relaxation responses rather than fight-or-flight reactions, his human brain interpreting the escalating chaos as evidence that the game was reaching its most interesting phase. The chamber's objectives appeared at locations that were mathematically unreachable given the environmental constraints, yet Alex accessed them by creating temporary stable zones using his collected training blades as structural elements. His approach transformed from individual survival to environmental collaboration, using the chamber's own hostile systems as tools for achieving objectives that their designers had assumed were theoretically possible but practically impossible. Level 7's collapsing space-time created situations where Alex needed to exist in multiple locations simultaneously, a challenge he met by using blade formations to extend his effective presence throughout the chamber. The most impossible aspect of his performance was the way Alex maintained perfect awareness of his collected arsenal while navigating chaos that overwhelmed most species' sensory processing capabilities. Training blades became sensory extensions that provided tactile feedback about environmental conditions, allowing Alex to navigate through situations where traditional visual or auditory navigation would have been useless. He's treating the entire system as a single organism, Commander Thex observed with professional respect that bordered on awe, watching Alex achieve integration with mechanical systems that seemed almost biological in its completeness. Alex completed objectives that required precision timing while surrounded by chaos that made precision measurement impossible, his actions guided by intuitive understanding rather than calculated analysis. The chamber's safety systems began generating warning signals as Alex's performance exceeded parameters that had been considered absolute physical limits. forcing the instructors to decide whether to continue observation or intervene. Environmental collapse reached critical stages where the chamber itself was approaching structural limits. Yet Alex continued navigating through conditions that should have been instantly lethal to any organic life form. His collected training blades formed patterns that seemed to create temporary pockets of stability within the overwhelming chaos, suggesting that Alex had discovered ways to impose order on systems designed to be completely unpredictable. 30 seconds to critical structural failure. The chamber's automated systems announced with mechanical urgency that seemed oddly appropriate for witnessing the impossible. Alex used those final seconds to create a kinetic masterpiece that incorporated every element of Level 7's chaos into a coordinated sequence that hit all remaining objectives, while somehow managing to look like artistic expression rather than survival desperation. The chamber's collapse reached its programmed conclusion and suddenly stopped, leaving Alex floating in perfect silence surrounded by training blade fragments that continued their gentle orbital dance around his relaxed form level. 7 concluded not because Alex had failed to meet its challenges, but because he had exceeded every parameter the system was capable of generating, forcing automatic shutdown when his performance surpassed theoretical maximum capabilities. The 4 instructors sat in stunned silence as they processed data, recordings that would require complete revision of everything they thought they understood about organic limitations and combat. Potential Alex hung motionless in the chamber's center, his breathing steady and his expression showing satisfaction rather than exhaustion, surrounded by the mechanical debris of an assessment that was supposed to be impossible. Status report, Commander Thex requested weakly, his professional composure cracking. Under the weight of witnessing something that challenged fundamental assumptions about reality, all objectives completed, the chamber's systems reported with mechanical precision that seemed inadequate for describing what had just occurred. Assessment parameters exceeded by factors that cannot be accurately calculated. Colonel Jara's energy form flickered, with emotions that had no equivalent in human experience as she struggled to process the implications of what they had. Recorded. Alex opened his eyes and smiled at his instructors through the observation window, his expression showing anticipation for their response, rather than any awareness that he had just accomplished something unprecedented in galactic military history. The observation booth remained silent for several minutes as the 4 instructors processed what they had witnessed, their sophisticated minds struggling to categorize an event that challenged every assumption they held about combat, physics, and the nature of organic capabilities. Commander Thex was the first to speak, his reptilian voice carrying tones of professional respect mixed with something approaching reverence as he addressed his colleagues about the implications of Alex's unprecedented performance. "We have not been conducting a reflex assessment," he announced with the careful precision of someone stating a fundamental truth that would reshape military doctrine. "We have been witnessing the birth of an entirely new form of combat philosophy." Captain Nira's compound eyes flickered as she reviewed sensor data that confirmed Alex had not only survived Level 7, but had somehow transformed it into an artistic performance that exceeded every theoretical limitation built into the chamber system's Major Korvac's crystalline form. Shimmered with analytical excitement as he processed the realization that human combat effectiveness operated on principles that no galactic species had ever encountered or imagined possible. Colonel Jara materialized more solidly than usual, her energy form stabilizing around emotions that she was still learning to identify as she contemplated the revolutionary implications of what Alex had demonstrated. The chamber systems completed their shutdown procedures, while Alex floated patiently in the center, still surrounded by training blade fragments that continued their gentle orbital patterns like mechanical planets around a biological star. His approach combined psychological resilience with environmental adaptation and pattern recognition capabilities that operate beyond our current understanding of organic cognition, Captain Nira observed, her scientific mind already working to document discoveries that would require new theoretical frameworks. Alex had demonstrated that human weakness, their lack of natural armor, enhanced reflexes, or sophisticated sensory apparatus, were actually incredible strengths when combined with adaptive creativity and the psychological ability to find joy within chaos. The 4 instructors realized they had been measuring Alex against standards designed for species that relied on overwhelming advantages, completely missing the fact that humans had evolved to thrive precisely when overwhelming advantages were unavailable. "Request permission to exit the chamber," Alex called cheerfully through the communication system, his voice showing no trace of stress despite having just completed what should have been a physically and psychologically devastating ordeal. Commander Thex activated the chamber's recovery systems, watching as Alex gracefully maneuvered to the exit, while his collected training blades continued their coordinated dance around his body like loyal mechanical companions. The human emerged from level 7 looking refreshed rather than exhausted, his movements showing the relaxed confidence of someone who had just enjoyed a particularly engaging recreational activity, rather than survived impossible odds. Cadet Reed. Colonel Jara addressed him formally, her energy form flickering with emotions that transcended species boundaries. "Your performance has exceeded every assessment parameter in Academy history." Alex smiled with genuine pleasure, but seemed unsurprised by their announcement, as if completing the impossible had been exactly what he expected, rather than a miraculous achievement worthy of galactic attention. "That was incredibly fun," he announced with enthusiasm that made the instructors exchange glances of continued bewilderment. "The patterns got really interesting once you stopped fighting them and started working with them instead." Major Korvac's analytical systems were generating reports that would require fundamental revision of military training protocols, tactical doctrine, and assumptions about organic limitations under extreme stress conditions. The instructors spent the following hours in intensive discussion about the implications of Alex's performance, ultimately reaching conclusions that would reshape galactic military education for generations within days. Alex found himself fast-tracked into advanced tactical programs that had previously been reserved for species with supernatural advantages, his unconventional approach becoming the foundation for entirely new categories of military specialization. More importantly, the Academy began developing training programs based on human adaptive principles, teaching other species to embrace chaos rather than eliminate it, to find creative solutions within impossible constraints. The most significant change was the introduction of flow combat curriculum that emphasized psychological flexibility, environmental collaboration, and the cultivation of play-like attitudes toward life-threatening situations. Alex became the Academy's first instructor of adaptive chaos navigation, teaching courses that seemed more like elaborate games than military training but produced graduates with unprecedented problem-solving capabilities. His classes began with dodgeball sessions that confused alien cadets until they discovered that childhood games contained tactical wisdom that traditional military education had never recognized. Students from dozens of species learned to approach combat scenarios with creative joy, rather than grim determination, finding that human-style psychological responses often proved more effective than their natural evolutionary advantages. The training blade assessment was redesigned to measure adaptive creativity rather than conventional reflexes, with Alex's Level 7 performance becoming the theoretical standard that all cadets aspired to achieve. Captain Nira developed new evaluation criteria that recognized pattern recognition and environmental integration as combat skills equivalent to traditional measures of speed, strength, and tactical knowledge. Major Korvac's analytical systems were upgraded to process non-linear problem-solving approaches, acknowledging that optimal solutions often emerged from intuitive creativity rather than calculated planning. Colonel Jara pioneered psychological training programs that taught students to maintain curiosity and playfulness even in life-threatening situations, recognizing these attitudes as combat advantages rather than character flaws. The Academy's reputation began attracting students who had previously been considered unsuitable for military service, artists, dancers, musicians, and athletes whose unconventional backgrounds suddenly seemed incredibly relevant to modern warfare. Alex's approach influenced strategy development at the highest levels of galactic military command, with traditional doctrine being supplemented by tactics that emphasized adaptability over overwhelming force. The most profound change was cultural rather than tactical, as species throughout the galaxy began recognizing that effective combat required not just physical capabilities but psychological resilience and creative problem-solving skills. Alex's final assignment at the Academy involved designing training scenarios that would prepare future cadets for environments where conventional advantages became irrelevant and survival depended on adaptive innovation. He created assessment protocols that looked like elaborate games but actually tested the fundamental qualities that made humans uniquely suited to chaotic warfare: creativity, persistence, and the ability to laugh at situations that should be terrifying. The Academy graduation ceremony featured Alex demonstrating advanced techniques to an audience of military leaders from across the galaxy, his performance treating deadly, serious tactical scenarios like components in an intricate dance. As he prepared to leave the Academy for advanced service assignments, Alex reflected on how his instructor's attempt to test his limitations had instead revealed capabilities that nobody, including himself, had realized existed. The training chamber where he had completed the impossible assessment became a permanent installation dedicated to teaching future generations that sometimes the best way to handle overwhelming challenges was to remember that everything, ultimately, was just a game played with higher stakes than usual. Years later, when other species encountered seemingly impossible tactical situations, they would ask themselves what Alex would do, usually arriving at solutions that involved treating deadly serious problems like elaborate puzzles designed for their entertainment and creative expression. The galaxy's military forces gradually transformed as Alex's influence spread, becoming more adaptable, creative, and psychologically resilient, proving that human weaknesses could indeed become incredible strengths when properly understood and applied.